Let's think about the whole idea of redemption. We've been looking at it through Genesis for several weeks now, and we've been seeing how God does things and He moves in people's lives and how He works in all things. We've seen how Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, even in their sin, God redeemed them. Even though they were banished from the garden, God took care of them. He provided clothing for them and He gave them instruction. We looked at Noah and the ark and how God had preserved Noah and his family in the ark, how He sealed the door so that they couldn't get out and nothing could get in, and that they would be safe there. We looked at Abraham and the promise that God gave him, that all the nations on the earth would be blessed through him. Last week we took a look at Isaac and the ram, and how important the ram was in that story, because the ram is a type of Christ, the substitute. The ram was the substitute so that Isaac's life would be preserved, and yet the ram's life would be taken, just as Jesus did that for us on the cross, so that He might give us new life. Well, today we're going to take a look at the story of Rebekah and Isaac. And it's a wonderful story. It's found in Genesis chapter 24. It's a really long chapter, and I'm not going to read the chapter for you. What I'll do is tell you some of the story and read some of the story for you to help you to better understand what's going on there. Now, Abraham, at this time in the story, is getting very old. And he wants to find a bride for his son Isaac. Isaac hasn't married. They're living in Canaan, and he calls his servant, his oldest servant, his most trusted servant in, and he says, I want you to go to the land of my fathers and find a bride for my son Isaac. I don't want Isaac to marry the Canaanite women. We don't know what there was about the Canaanites other than they were not Hebrew. They were not what Abraham's tribe was. And so he wanted his son to have a bride from his family. And so the servant packed up 10 camels, and he left with a treasure trove of gifts and jewels and riches, really, to give to the father and the family of the one to whom he would find as Isaac's wife. In Genesis 24, this one verse, it talks about that. It says, Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Now, by my calculations, the journey to Nahor would have been about a 2-week journey, anywhere around 300 miles or so, to get back to the land where Abraham had come from. And so during that time, he would have had plenty of opportunity to think about and plan on how he was going to find a bride for Isaac. I mean, how was he going to know who the right person was? How would he find one from Abraham's family? This man didn't know them, and so how would they find it out? How would he find it? Well, as he was praying and as he was devising his plan, the plan comes to fruition in front of him. The answer is there. He says, Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, Please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, Drink, and I will water your camels, let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. So this was his prayer. This was his plan, that God was going to be the one to show him who was going to be Isaac's wife. And so, lo and behold, as he was praying that prayer, out comes Rebekah. She's coming to the well. Now, Rebekah had a really difficult job. All the women of that time had difficult jobs because their responsibility was to go and get water for their families. And twice a day, they would take a big water jug, or maybe 2 if they could carry them. They would go to the town's well, they would fill them with water, and then they would bring them back to their family. And so that was what she was doing. We don't really know how far the well was from where Rebekah lived, but generally the well could be up to a mile in distance away. So it wasn't like you just walked out of your house and went right there to it. There was some effort involved. In that time, the well acted kind of like the town square did in a small town. Or, not to offend anyone, the beauty shop for you ladies. And the barber shop for us men. You know, we like to gossip there. That's where people would congregate around the well. And I remember as a kid in the town that my dad grew up in, or in the county seat of it, where he grew up, they would have park benches around the town square, and you would see men out there whittling. And I remember going with my dad, and these guys have their pocket knives out, and they're talking, and they're just chipping off wood. And I'm like, Dad, what are they doing? He says, they're whittling. I said, what's whittling? He said, well, it's just a way to pass the time. They're just cutting wood. And so my dad got me a little pocket knife so I could whittle. And I think I cut my fingers so many times he took it away. But it was a way to pass the time, and the well was that way. It was a congregating place. Shepherds would bring their sheep from all over the area to come and water them there. So Rebekah was used to seeing people of different persuasions, strangers, people that she didn't know. It was very common for her to see that because that's where they would all come. And so she makes her way out there, and she sees Abraham, she's Abraham's servant, comes up to her and says, can I have a drink of water? And she immediately gives him a drink of water, no fear. And then she says, can I water your camels too? Well, at that point, he knew that he had found the one. Now, the text tells us that she was a beautiful woman, that she was a virgin. It said that she was of marrying age, which would have made her probably around 13 or 14 years old, or older. I mean, that was the custom back then. And so she gave him water, gave the camels water, and then she went and told her family what had happened. Listen to what he did when he realized that she was the one, that she was the answer to his prayer. It says, the man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord. He worshiped the Lord. God had answered his prayer right there, and he knew it. So Rebekah runs and she tells her family. And once Abraham's servant had met the family and had told them everything that God had done and everything that Abraham was wanting to do, they worshiped God, and then they did something very unusual for that culture. They said to Rebekah, do you want to go? You don't have to go, but will you go? That was unheard of to give the daughter a choice. Typically, they just had to go. And she said, yes, I want to go, and so they agreed, and they left. Now, listen to how Isaac meets Rebekah for the first time, or how she sees him. It says, meanwhile, Isaac, whose home was in the Negev, had returned from Beer Lahai Roi. One evening, as he was walking and meditating in the fields, he looked up and saw the camels coming. When Rebekah looked up and saw Isaac, she quickly dismounted from her camel. Who is that man walking through the field to meet us? She asked the servant. And he replied, it is my master. So Rebekah covered her face with her veil. Then the servant told Isaac everything he had done. And Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and she became his wife. He loved her deeply, and she was special comfort to him after the death of his mother. And don't you wish that we found spouses like that today? No, me either. No. But it is a story of redemption. It's not a story of redemption from someone or people who have done something bad, but it's a story of God redeeming the lives of Rebekah and Isaac, of doing something amazing through them. It's a story of God fulfilling his promise through them. You see, their actions and their lives weren't perfect. If you keep reading on the story about them, you see things that they did and things that they went through. And they weren't perfect people. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that God was working in their lives in spite of, or because of, or whatever way you want to look at it. Whatever they were doing, it didn't matter. God was going to fulfill his purpose. Because it was going to be Abraham, Isaac, and now Isaac and Rebekah were going to have a son, and the promise would continue on into Jacob, their son. But there are three things that I want you to think about this morning as it relates to the story. And the first one is to always trust God. That just seems that's just what we do, right? I mean, it seems like that's too simple a thing to think about. But really, do we always trust God? You know, Abraham's servant, he trusted that God was going to lead him to the right person. Abraham's servant didn't know who the right person was. He didn't know how he would find the right person. He didn't know the circumstances in which he would find the right person. He didn't realize that God already had planned it out and that he would meet Rebekah as soon as he arrived there in that town. He prayed. God answered his prayer. He was patient, yet he was specific. How many times do we pray to God and we're so general or we're so vague or we're so all over the world that we'll never know if God answered it or not? Or we put so much we put God in such a box that if it doesn't come out just like we ask, we don't believe him. But you see, the writer of Hebrews tells us to come boldly to the throne of grace. He tells us to come without fear. We don't have to worry, is God going to turn us away? We don't have to hem and haw with God. God is our Father. We are his children. We have his ear. He listens to us. But just like Abraham's servant, there must be humility. Remember what drove Abraham's servant to worship God when Rebekah fulfilled all the things that he had asked for? He worshiped God. It was his humility that drove him to worshiping God because he realized that God was at work. You see, we have no right to demand anything of God. We go to God in humility. We go to God in trust. And we offer up our prayers of petition. But we have to trust that God knows best. That God knows better than we do. And that's a hard thing for us sometimes. But God knows best. And that's where we have to trust. That's where Abraham was. That's where his servant was. And in fact, that's where Isaac was, because Isaac took Rebekah into his mother's tent and she became his wife. All because of trusting God. But another thing we need to do is love deeply. I love how the text tells us that Isaac loved Rebekah deeply. You know, in that part of the world, in an arranged marriage, love was not the overarching contributor to a marriage, right? I mean, families would select the boy and the girl, and they would pay money or whatever, and they would put them together. Love was not a part of it. Now, if you grew to love each other, wonderful. But if you didn't, so what? I mean, it wasn't that. Love was not their overarching motive for why they got people together. The reason they got people together was for procreation. The infant mortality rate was so high in that time that many children died. So they may have 10, 12, or more children so that they might have 3 or 4 that would live and continue the family line. But we are to love deeply. And I think that's one of the things that we need to take away from the story is, as Isaac loved Rebekah deeply, even with all their flaws, we should love our spouses deeply. We should love our friends deeply. We should love people deeply, because that's what honors God. And then the third is to seek God's best for your family. Abraham wanted the best for his son Isaac. He wasn't willing to settle for what was around him, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, of the Canaanites. He wanted him to go and find him a person from their tribe, if you will, from his family, from somebody that he knows the character of. And I think that's instructional for us, because I think as parents, we all want the best for our children, don't we? I mean, I know I did when mine were growing up, and I still do, even though they're grown. And in our culture, how they arrange marriages isn't the norm, but teaching our sons and daughters the right characteristics and qualities of somebody that we would want them to be with is imperative. We need to teach our children well. We need to pray for our children and our grandchildren for the people that they will potentially date and marry. It's that important. We need to teach them to look for godly qualities and characteristics in their dating friends. Study after study have also shown that the type of friends our children have determines a lot in how they will grow up. If our children have good friends, positive friends, good qualities and characteristics, they're going to grow up that way. But if they're not, if their children that they hang out with are not that way, then they'll pull them down too. And so our children will grow up with the bad habits and those sorts of things. So as parents, it's incumbent upon us to teach the qualities of godly qualities so that we can instill those into our children and into our grandchildren, so that as they select a spouse, they'll select wisely. One of the greatest gifts that God gives us are our children. Now, as a grandparent, I'm reconsidering that statement because I'm thinking grandchildren are the greatest gift. But here's the flip side of that: without children, there would be no grandchildren. So we got to kind of keep it in order. Yeah, we got to respect that. But we need to always seek the best for our family. And you know, that doesn't stop when our kids are grown and gone. We always have an influence in their lives. We don't want to run them, but we do influence them. And we do have an opportunity to model for them the godly qualities. And here's the best part about that. Even if you blow it 1,000 times, you can always get up from the ashes. You can always rise, and you can always begin to start teaching them and showing them the right example. You know, our kids are quick to call hypocrisy on their parents, aren't they? I mean, they call us out if we just misspeak on anything, but we can't say much about them. But that's okay, because it creates honesty in the relationship. And we have an opportunity as parents to apologize to our children and say, yeah, we blew that one. Sorry. I'm going to work to do better. But I love you more than anything in this world, and I want you to make the right choice. So we have to do that as parents and as grandparents. So, always trust God. We don't know the circumstances and the situations in our lives. We live day to day, we plan what we can plan, but then life happens, right? And we can't figure out all the contingencies and all the possibilities, and life kind of infringes on us. And if we don't have a strong faith and a strong trust in God, when those difficulties come, we're going to be, like Paul said, we're going to be swayed by it. He says every wind of doctrine, but we can just say by every wind of our society. We're going to have no anchor to hold us secure. We're going to have no place to look to find strength and peace and understanding. But that's why we have the Word of God. That's why we have a church. That's why we have Christian friends. And that's why we always trust God no matter what. There's no other place to turn to. But then love deeply those that are in your life. Don't take for granted the people that you love. If you love them, let them know it. Show it in some way. You don't have to always say it. Some people, my dad rarely ever told me he loved me, but I knew he did. Some people just can't articulate it. But everybody can do it in their actions. Remember, love is a verb. Love is what you do. It's not what you say. Not only what you say. And then always seek God's best for your family. Family is the glue that holds our society together. Our society gets fractured when the family is fractured. In our society today, we have lost all civility. If you disagree with another person, you're their enemy for life, and they'll do whatever they can to destroy you. We've seen that politically. That is not how we operate in the church. That is not how children of God operate. We may disagree. We may completely disagree. But we still show kindness and concern for those with whom we disagree. So always model that for your children. Model that in your home. It's hard, I know it is, because things don't always go the way we like. But we can do it. It's incumbent upon us to do that. I think that that's what God expects of us to do. So look, remember from this story of Isaac and Rebekah, those three things. And then to put the bow around it is to do like Abraham's servant did. Worship God. He worshiped because he bowed the knee to God. In humility, he looked to God. And that's how our lives have to reflect it. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful that you're a God who gives us second, third, fourth, fifth chance. So many. You never put a number on it. We do, but you don't. You know who we are. You know what we do. You know that we blow it. Even in the story of Isaac and Rebekah, if we were to look further, when he lies about her being his wife and says she's his sister, and when Rebekah lies to Isaac about who the son is in front of him and steals the birthright, if you will. Lord, no one's perfect but Jesus. We have no claim on that. So we only should live in humility. We should live in compassion and understanding for all people. We should love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Lord, we thank you for this gift of Jesus and this gift of your word, which shows us, teaches us, comforts us, even as we go through the hard days of life.